Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
It is my pleasure and an honor to introduce Tony Hay, who was a professor at Southampton in parallel computing. And from then on, was the starter and the founder of eScience in the UK, and then he went to Microsoft, where he has been for the past 80 years, conducting and fostering multidisciplinary research. And one thing that I just told Tony is that whenever anyone asks me what eScience is about, and to give a good definition, I always use his definition, which I hope he will tell us about in his talk. Thank you, Tony, and after your talk, I will start giving the word to the public to ask questions. Okay? Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, it's a great honor to be back here, and thank you very much for those kind words. So today I'm going to say a little bit about what eScience is. I have a lot of connections with Brazil. When I was a professor at Southampton, my research group was actually at one point known as Little Brazil, because I had large numbers of students from USP in Sao Paulo. We were very good at football, and they also cooked me a feijoada, I remember. And because I was the boss, they gave me the pig's ear, which was very flattering. And the other connection I have, I support a soccer team, a football team called Southampton, and our gift to the world, actually from Southampton, is Brazilian soccer, because you all know Charles Miller, who actually founded Brazilian soccer, came from Southampton. He was trained at Southampton. So, but let me get to the topic of the meeting. So this is the sort of outline of the talk. So I'll give some background to why I believe eScience is so important, so relevant, and how science is changing. I'll give some examples of eScience for environment and genomics and in healthcare, which shows that these will solve the problems. We have the potential to solve the problems of the world, to actually help economies and really create innovation. And then specifically look at some of the projects we're doing in Latin America. Some words about open science and then some conclusions. So these are just some of the examples of recent publications which stress the importance of big data. And big data comes from all sorts of sources, from satellites, from high throughput genomic machines, from sensor networks on the ocean floor, from accelerators like they have in Geneva at CERN. So huge amounts of data, and in all parts of science, it's not always going up to petabytes, but it's certainly going to an order of magnitude more data than scientists have had to deal with. And so this is in science, and a similar phenomenon is happening in industry. And so if you look in a popular search engine called Bing, maybe not so popular in Brazil, but if I look up data scientist in Bing, this is what it gets. It says, data scientist, the hottest job you haven't heard of. What is a data scientist? Data scientist is the role of the future. So data science for both scientific investigations and for industry is now an important discipline. And training people to be data scientists, yes, we train them on scientific problems, but they can apply their skills in industry. And so just to pick up one thing, this is from the Wikipedia article, What is Data Science? And you see it involves lots of different sets of skills. And I would probably include other skills there, like data curation, data management, a little more explicitly than they have there. But the data science involves a whole collection of different types of skills. So when I came to Microsoft, I first met Jim Gray from Microsoft in 2001 when I started doing eScience. And we continued to debate. until I found it easier for me to join Microsoft to continue the debate. And Jim had a slightly different way of phrasing it, but it's the same message. And so this is Jim's way of explaining the changes that are coming about in science. He pointed out that the way we've done science historically, we've had experimental data, measuring the planets and so on. We've had people like Isaac Newton, Maxwell, Schrödinger, summarizing these experiments in laws of nature which are mathematical. And so the ways we've actually explored nature have been with both experiment and with theoretical analysis of these equations, which you could then make experiment predictions, which you could then test. And those are the two, if you like, the two basic paradigms for doing science. What Jim pointed out was, first of all, about in 1950 onwards, we had computers, and computers enable us to explore different aspects of science that are inaccessible in any other way. So, for example, if you want to know about galaxy formation, if you want to know about climate change, the only way you can do, quote, experiments is by simulation. And so simulation, you need to train students to know about numerical methods, about algorithms, about parallel computers, about languages, programming languages, and so on. Different set of skills than theory and experiment. So Ken Wilson, Nobel Prize winner in the 1970s, called that the third paradigm. Jim introduced the idea now that we need another set of skills. So it doesn't replace the previous three. We need all of those skills, but we need another set of skills. We need students and engineers and scientists who understand how to deal with data. Data-intensive science is going to be with us for a long time, and it's as we talked about with the instruments, with sensor networks, with satellite surveys, with enormous accelerators and so on, neutron sources and so on, which generate huge amounts more data than we've ever had before. And just dealing with that data, we need a set of tools and technologies. If we're doing a pharmaceutical company, they have their biologists in one building, their genomicists in another building, maybe in a different country. They need to collaborate. You have distributed data. You need to manage. You need to manipulate. So the set of tools and technologies to support data federation and collaboration is what I call eScience. And it's to enable you to do science in ways you couldn't do before, better, different, and faster is how I usually describe it. And the fact that you hone your tools and technologies from computer science onto those problems means that you improve your computer science as well. So data analysis, data visualization, data mining, and eventually disseminating and preserving some of these things. So these are the four paradigms, and eScience is the sort of set of technologies applying computer science to scientific problems. This is another slide from Jim Gray, who alas is no longer with us, pointing out that we've been known for some time that in chemistry there's the traditional chemistry, but there's also computational chemistry, there's traditional biology and now computational biology, but there's now also bioinformatics, chemoinformatics. There's an informatics aspect to many, many fields. I've seen even archaeology and astronomy are talking about the informatics dimension. And there you have the problems of managing lots of data, how you organize it, how you share it, how you visualize it, how you interrogate it. These are problems that we need to understand and train students and faculty and researchers into doing this. And these skills are obviously of relevance to industry. So, changing nature of research, the models are very complicated, multidisciplinarity is fundamental, large timescales, large spatial scales, data sets can be real-time, so that the US are doing an ocean observatory initiative. They're putting fiber optic cable down on the floor of the ocean near Seattle, and that will stream in data 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And that changes the way we do science, because instead of just getting a small amount of data, we now have a flood of data. How do we find significant signals in that data? And it may not just be nicely structured, it can be all sorts of unstructured data like the web and so on, how we actually mine that data. And so distributed organizations, virtual organizations, if you like, I want to share data from here with a researcher over there, but not allow everybody to see it. We need to do it securely and share data with whom we want to, and management and social challenges come about. Because instead of a professor publishing a paper with just 2 of his students, now it may be a paper with 10 professors and 20 students, and that's a change, a cultural change. So I really think this is a unique time. It's an opportunity for computer scientists to work with scientists to solve some of the grand challenges facing humanity. And in so doing, when doing eScience in the UK, I found initially there was a very great misunderstanding in that the scientists didn't know what computer science was about. They thought computer scientists just wrote programs, and computer scientists didn't understand the complexity of the scientist's problem. And you needed to work together, to talk to each other for 6 months or so before you understood each other's problems, what one could bring to the problem. So it really is an important long-term investment to get scientists and computer scientists working together. But I do believe that that's the way we can solve some of the problems. And so I'll give some examples of that. So there's a couple of books which you can download. They're published under a Creative Commons license. One is some essays on the fourth paradigm, where my role, my co-editors, Christine Toll and Stuart Tansley, did all the work. My role was merely to bully the authors, a computer scientist and a scientist, not to write a dry technical scientific paper, but an essay which could be read by a large audience. So we asked some scientists and computer scientists to get together and to visualize what their field would look like 5 or 10 years from now. And that's what this essay contains, and you can get a copy on the web. And similarly, we have in Science at Microsoft, it's examples of eScience, examples of computer scientists working with scientists doing innovative, exciting things. And so if you want to find out more about those, I invite you to download them. We have some copies here, and I have some copies to give to my colleagues. So this is the fourth paradigm essays, and this is the Science at Microsoft, some examples from genomics using machine learning, the environment, and health and computer vision. Examples of eScience. So let me just give some examples so you'll see exactly the scope and breadth of the sort of things you can do. Let's look at the environment, genomics, and healthcare. So, in fact, I won't say very much about computational ecology and environmental science. It's an exciting area, and particularly relevant in Brazil, because you have the rainforest and the Amazon, and a huge range of different regimes and fauna here that are vital for the world. What is the impact of the decisions, the policies that one makes? We really need data to inform those decisions, and we also don't know enough about the global carbon cycle, and that's the sort of topic that Drew Purves, in his keynote after this lecture, will be talking about. So this really is an advertisement for you to go and listen to Drew, who will tell you in more detail the sort of things that they've been doing, the tools that they've been producing, which we hope will be easily usable by scientists around the world without having to know all the details about relational databases and so on. So I recommend that one goes and listens to Drew. Genomics and personalized medicine. So what's the promise of genomics? We all know the human genome has now been sequenced, and we hope we will actually learn from that to understand the causes of diseases, to help you diagnose the disease, to find out who's likely to get it, to find out whether this drug or this drug is suitable for your genetic makeup, or whether you'll get a bad prediction, a bad reaction to that drug. So personalized medicine will become a reality. It hasn't become a reality yet, but this is using machine learning in genomics is a key area, and I'll just give one example here. So we've sequenced the human genome. What we're now trying to do is genome-wide association studies, where you take a whole population and you look at all the different defects and varieties, the SNPs that you have. And so these people are healthy and they have this particular genomic sequence. These people are actually unhealthy and they differ in this particular area here. But this person has the same defect but is healthy, and this person has no defect and is unhealthy. So you have actually there are subtleties in actually understanding the genetic causes of disease, and you need to have a large population. Now, the difficulty for doing that is that you have typically a control population, and then you want to look at your patients and to analyze them. But there may be different genetic makeups in the control population, which may be different in different places, and they can confuse the analysis. There may be false correlations. These people may be related. They may come all from the same village or whatever and have the same genetic correlations. So you need to take out spurious correlations. And to do that, you need to do very sophisticated machine learning algorithms. And so that's what David Heckerman and his machine learning group in Microsoft Research have been working with researchers to do. So they've developed an algorithm called FastLMM, standing for Factored Spectrally Transformed Linear Mixed Models. Doesn't matter what it is. But the important thing is to show the power of computer science, that before this, the runtime increased with the cube of the number of patients that you were trying to look at, the number of people you're doing the study. And because it was very expensive in computation, it actually meant you could only do small samples of a few thousand. By actually doing a new algorithm which grows linearly in the number of people being analyzed, you can actually go up to hundreds of thousands of people, and that means you have a much bigger signal and you can get much more accurate results. So changing the algorithm can have a huge impact and enable you to do analyses that you would not be able to do. So this is, they put their algorithm to the test, and this is the code name in Microsoft was called Moondog. It was using cloud computing and the Wellcome Trust data, which had genomic data for 1,000 people and covered 7 common diseases. And so what they did was look at pairs of correlations of defects, these SNP pairs, and there's about 60 billion of them. And to do that on one processor would take you about 1,000 years and generate 20 terabytes of data. So instead, what they did was use 27,000 computers up in the cloud and analyze that. Took just 13 days. So they were able, by using cloud computing, its computing resources far beyond what a research group in medicine could do. They can't have a 27,000 machine in their laboratory, but they can use these cores up in the cloud. And from that, one of the latest results is that this pair of defects, this particular one here, is linked to coronary heart disease, and that's just been published in scientific reports. So it's an example of the sort of things you can do with new algorithms and understanding new insights about disease. So that's an example in genomics. This is another example which is relevant certainly to Brazil, which I learned as one of the largest national health systems. So this is a healthcare challenge. This is a quotation about the US. So people who go into intensive care, into hospitals, it turns out when people come out of intensive care, 1 in 5 of these patients is called back into intensive care. And that's a very expensive thing. It uses up the facilities. It actually, it would seem to be unnecessary. And so if you could reduce the amount of readmissions, it would save, in this case it says for over the whole of the US, $17 billion a year. So if you could reduce the amount of readmissions when you've had somebody in intensive care, you let them go, and if you could predict what the probability of someone coming back was, and then give extra support for people who are more likely, that would save money. And that was the challenge that our machine learning group under Eric Horvitz in Microsoft Research did. They looked at hospital data, they had access to hospital data, which covered an 8-year period and a whole variety of things. Not just the reason that the patient went into the intensive care unit, but all sorts of other activities that the hospital had records about that patient. So taking all that information into account, 25,000 variables, they were able to make predictions as to the likelihood of that patient being readmitted into intensive care. And so this is the classifier they produced. These are false positives, these are genuine ones, and what you have to do is to reduce the false positives. If you say everybody's likely to come back, that doesn't help at all. You have to get a prediction of ones that are genuinely more likely to come back and to check that. And so that's what they produced, and they checked it against real data, and this is the real data which shows, very similar to what I showed, that they can, with various different test subjects, they get a predictor that they can predict with some likelihood that this patient will be readmitted. And if that's the case, then you can give extra follow-up, you can give extra medical support in the home to prevent them coming back. And that has now been translated into a product. It's now part of what used to be Microsoft Amalga, but that's our hospital system, information system, which is now a separate company called Caradigm. But this readmissions manager is actually a component in that, and there is some real data. So it's now live. You can look at the people, the admission, the discharge, the name, and so on, what the problem was. You have all this data, and you can actually go and check out the experiments. So this is initial pilot. This is 1 month later, and what you see is that the total readmission rate has reduced by 3% in just 1 month after deploying this system. And that's, for this particular hospital, over $1 million of savings. So that's the sort of power of machine learning in healthcare. It really can make a difference if you include all these things. So that's why it's relevant to almost every country. And of course, by trying on machine learning on this particular problem, we get better algorithms which we can try on some of the ones that Microsoft's products care about. There are other opportunities for machine learning in healthcare. It's now, sadly, you go into hospital, it's a very dangerous place. You can get an infection and you can even die from these things. So this is particular one, C. difficile. This is, again, trying to predict the likelihood of infection in hospitals. Can you do something about it? So this is one of the problems that they're now working on. So these are some of the challenges that machine learning is taking in healthcare. There is another grand challenge which you see around you in Sao Paulo, and that's an urban city problem. Sao Paulo has over 10 million people, and more if you include the surrounding towns, and all sorts of data you get: traffic flow, energy consumption, environment, economic, and so on, and huge amounts of data. How can you optimize these? And how could you build a new city which actually did this better? So these are the sort of challenges that we see not only in Latin America, but also in China, India, and in other parts of the world. Urban city planning, urban analysis of optimization of resources. And so this is a problem that we're now beginning to look at, both in China and in the USA, how one can actually optimize cities, the IT systems of cities. How can you make use of all the information to make sure your systems are robust, dependable, and efficient? So, I was then going to give a few examples of the projects that we've been doing in Latin America itself. So, the first one I want to talk about is Live Andes, and there's a video which I hope we'll show later about preserving Latin America's wildlife. And this is concerned with rare species. So working with the Laxia Virtual Institute, which is based in Chile, getting tools to find out the distribution of these endangered species. But they're endangered and they're rare, and therefore they're not very often seen. So this is, if you like, a crowdsourcing technology. So if you are a tourist there and you see a rare animal or a rare bird, you make a photograph, and of course it knows exactly where it is, location, and you can submit it, and you can help increase the data sets and get more data on these rare species. So this is preserving wildlife one picture at a time. So Live Andes is a project that we hope now to extend to a broader area, but it's a very exciting project using crowdsourcing to help give better data on endangered species. This is a project we have in Brazil. It's about sugarcane, and you all know it came to me as a surprise when I first came to Brazil that the cars run on ethanol mainly, although you now have gasoline, but ethanol is still a major component for the Brazilian economy, provides 18% of its energy. So the question is, can you make variants of sugarcane that can grow, for example, in drier, hotter conditions with climate change, that you can grow in different parts of the country than we do at the moment? Can you make it more efficient to produce ethanol and so on? So to do that, you need to understand the genetic makeup of sugarcane. And it turns out that that's a very difficult problem, because we all have a chromosome from our parents, and we have two chromosomes, two of each chromosome in our body, so we're diploid. Sugarcane can have as many as 5 to 16 copies of these chromosomes in there, and therefore sequencing and building that up is very complicated, because you don't know which chromosome copy it came from, and because it says very high heterozygosity, what it means that each of these copies of the chromosomes have slightly different variants, slightly different defects, and they matter. And that's why the properties of sugarcane are what they are. And so assembling that is a very difficult challenge. So nobody's actually done the genome assembly for sugarcane yet. And so we're working with Glaucia Souza from USP and other researchers in Brazil to sequence the DNA of a particular representative strain of sugarcane. And the goal is to, as I said, to get better drought tolerance, better disease resistance, and more efficient ethanol production. So where are we in that project? Well, as of this month, we've been analyzing the data from Glaucia at USP, and we have various versions of the data, a version which is, if you like, only one chromosome, the monoploid, but what we need to do is the polyploid, which has large numbers of base pairs, and what we're trying to do is assemble these to understand the whole of the sequence. And what we've managed to do at the moment is do okay. It's probably as good as most of the plant genomes that have been sequenced, but it isn't really good enough yet, and therefore what we need to do, it's because it's really like a jigsaw puzzle. You don't know whether this bit comes from this copy of the chromosome or this bit, and you really have to work extremely hard to put it all together. So they're trying a new hierarchical approach to get much longer fragments of genomes, which you can then assemble. And we hope to have some really exciting results before the end of the year. So not yet solved, but we think that's an exciting project, and we'll see what will come of it in the next few months. And again, it's using techniques for putting things together, from using computer science techniques to make these more efficient. This is another product which is important to Brazil. This is actually in Colombia, right in the coffee growing area of Colombia, as opposed to the drug cartel area in Colombia. And this is a center for computational bioinformatics up in the highlands in Colombia, and we're working with them and a number of other producers. supporters, and what they're trying to do is to develop a whole set of resources for biological data, for health systems, and they also have computing and scientific computing. So putting all this together, they hope to be able to solve some of the problems, to make sure they understand how best to optimize and look after the coffee regions, but also other areas, and so they can offer consulting and training for people there. So this is the new center in Colombia, which we've been collaborating with. A couple of projects to finish up with. These are projects that we've been doing with our Laxia collaboration. This is a national, a multinational LATAM collaboration centered in Chile, but it involves researchers from different countries. And this is looking at frogs, monitoring frogs to see as an early indicator for ecological stress. So if you want to know if the climate change is having a bad effect, or if logging or whatever, actually finding a frog population and monitoring the effect of that frog population is one way of doing it. And so this is a sort of schematic of the approach that they're taking. This is the distribution of amphibians, and what they're trying to do is get a representative frog species to actually give them some indication of the health of that ecosystem. And this is using GPU chips, GPU chips, to accelerate image processing visualization for a number of applications. So if you can make use of these chips, it's a very effective and cheap way of doing computation. And so there's weather forecast visualization, trying to recognize textures in motion for water, fire, smoke, and so on. Looking at high-resolution tomographic images, looking at fracture risk for osteoporosis. That's one of the applications. And lastly, looking at noise reduction algorithms for medical images to try and get better medical images in order to be able to observe features in that. And general image recognition you see here on motorways. So GPUs provided a very effective way of actually doing better image analysis, and this project is looking at that, and it's done with Alexandra Diel from UBA. So I should say something about the agenda that is now you see in the USA, you see in the UK and in Europe, and many places around the world, the belief that you need open data and open science in order to help us solve the problems of the world most efficiently. So, the data life cycle. So, just acquiring the data is only the beginning. So you can do it from a supercomputer simulation, from a sensor network, you get all this data. What are you going to do with it? You may need to share it, you may need to collaborate, some of it be held here in Sao Paulo, other parts may be held in New York. And putting this together, combining them, these are collaborating, and then you visualize that data. You need sets of tools to do this. And then, of course, you need to be able to analyze and data mine, to go from data to information to knowledge, turning data into insight. And finally, you need to publish that. You need to put it out there so people can get it, people can see your paper. So open access to publications is, I think, a key part of this. But also you need to give people access to the data on which you came to your conclusions. So dissemination both of the paper and of the data, and how you share this. And then you spent a lot of money to get some of this data. We can't keep all the data everybody creates, but you need to decide which of the data you want to keep, which you want to preserve. And it's not a trivial way of doing it. If you have, for example, many scientists store data in spreadsheets. Well, I can tell you in 10 years' time, the version of the spreadsheet program that they used won't exist. The version of the operating system probably won't exist, and the hardware. So how do you actually preserve data in a spreadsheet that you can still make sensible use of in 10 years' time? These are challenges for computer science. So just some examples. This is an example we did with the astronomy community. It enables you to look at whole lots of data. You can look at the night sky as you've never seen it. You can look at the visible, but you can also compare that with the ultraviolet and the gamma ray, or the infrared and the X-ray, and the radio waves. So you can look at all these different spectra. There's a feature of Worldwide Telescope which I think is going to be important in this data-rich world that we're coming. And it's the ability to tell stories with data. So what the Worldwide Telescope tool tells you is that you can actually have an expert astronomer talk, for example, about star formation. And they can show that this data set in the ultraviolet and this data set in the visible, looking at this galaxy and that galaxy, and they can take you on a tour through all these data sets and come to your conclusion so you can understand how they reach their conclusion. And that capability for these tours through the data is important, because other people may come to different conclusions, and you need to allow them to make their tours through data. So you can imagine, for example, with climate change, it's quite controversial. So scientists can show how they came to their conclusion by showing how this data set and this data set and this data set come together, but other people can take different routes and come to different conclusions. So Worldwide Telescope, the ability to do tours is extremely important. And yesterday, Rob gave a session tutorial on Layerscape, which instead of looking at the sky, you turn the telescope onto the Earth. And so this is, if you like, this is plotting seismic events. And Mr. Wegener had a lot of trouble convincing scientists that tectonic plates was relevant, but actually if you just plot on the globe the seismic events, you can see the outline of the tectonic plates extremely well. This is the ring of fire around the Pacific here, and this is the mid-Atlantic spreading of the ocean plates. So you can see these instantly. You can actually go and do models. This is the Japanese Tohoku earthquake, and this is somebody's model of how the plate is being subduction zone going underneath the Pacific plate, and you can actually go and look at these models and do a tour of these models. So these sort of ways of handling huge amounts of data, you will need sophisticated visualization tools. I've been talking about science, but it's also true increasingly in the arts, humanities and social sciences. And so this is a project we've been doing with Berkeley and with Moscow State University. It's an open source project. It's called ChronoZoom. And here you see you're putting, you can go from 17.8 billion years, or you can look at Earth's history or human prehistory or human history. You can compare all sorts of different types of events on the same plot. You can zoom in, zoom out, and this is the sort of visualization tool that'll be suitable for certain types of applications. So this is one that's being used at the moment by the so-called big history community, which is looking at how biological evolution, how civilizations, how geological evolution, how they play together. And so this is one example of a visualization tool. When I came to Microsoft in 2005, Bill Gates gave a talk at the supercomputing conference. This was a slide that he used. And it's still relevant today. It shows that really we're approaching a different type of publication, because just having the paper publication is fine and still useful, there's no doubt, but actually more so if you can have interactive data. You can go from the publication to the data, you can go from the simulation. The authors plotted this, but if you can go and see the computer program that produced it, you could change the parameters and so on. You make the data available to other people, so it's reproducible. You can have different ways of collaboration. The documents are dynamic. And so these types of publications and new types of publishing are going to be extremely important. And we're all familiar with the academic review process, but there could be other ways of doing it. There are different metrics that you can put on, and you see organizations like the Public Library of Science, instead of having a citation impact for a journal, they give you now what you're more interested in, how many people have cited that particular article in a journal. And so there are different ways of measuring impact. And other people take into account blogs and Twitter feeds and all this sort of stuff. So there's a revolution going on in scholarly communication. And this is an example of that revolution. And again, it involves all sorts of different technologies, and computer science and scientists need to collaborate to make that happen. I talked about curating data in a spreadsheet. Well, this is a tool, it's an open source tool that you can either use as a service from the cloud, or you can actually plug into Excel, and it enables you to curate, to add information, to add metadata to your spreadsheet, so other people will know what the data represents, what the calculations in each box and column represent. So it's an example of a tool that you need to deal with the data life cycle. So I've only talked about the visualization, and this is a little bit about curation, but I've also talked about the machine learning, data mining aspects. And so there's a whole lot of tools that you need to have to look after data throughout the data life cycle. In 2003, many funding agencies got together in Berlin, and this was the Berlin Declaration, to promote the internet as a functional instrument for global scientific knowledge base and for human reflection. And they felt that open access was extremely important, and it was not just the publication of your paper, but also original scientific research results, raw data and metadata, source materials, digital representations of pictorial and graphical materials, and also multimedia material. So all the stuff that goes around your paper, at least some of that needs to be made available to other people, and in order that it can be used by other people, you have to put some metadata with it. So this is an education process for scientists, because previously we have not done this as a community very well. People who do the work of looking after data, it's a form of publication. In biology, it's increasingly a form of publication of data sets. People need to be able to get credit for publishing data, and you need to be able to cite the people who made the data set. And so there are organizations like DataCite. ORCID is to distinguish who the researchers are. I work in Korea, and many researchers in Korea are called Lee or Kim, and you need to know which Lee and which Kim is the one. And so having a unique identifier, that's what ORCID's about. DataCite is about citing publications. And then, in order to make different data sets usable, there are a number of different ways of doing that. You can make very complicated ways of interoperability. This is a very simple protocol called the Open Data Protocol, which is based on HTTP and Atom, and it's now in the OASIS standardizations body. It's supported by people like IBM, SAP and Microsoft and others, and so this is at least a step towards data interoperability, that I can use this data set and combine it with this data set to produce new knowledge. And so it's one of the sort of things in this open data, open science agenda that are beginning to change the way we do things. And this is the last slide from Jim Gray, but this is the vision that I have and that I think we should work towards, that in the future you will have all literature available online, because open access is coming and will be available. So I'll be able to see your paper, and I can then go, and from your paper I can find the data you used, I can combine it with my data, make a new discovery, publish it, and so on. And so, having worked with researchers around the world, what I see is that we're not very efficient as a global research community at doing our research. We discover the same things many times over. If we could make the results and the data easily available so everybody could see it, you could increase the velocity, the scientific productivity. You could solve some of the problems in healthcare, disease, environment that are facing the world. You could really make a big step forward for science and society. So a vision of, if you like, a global scientific library which consists of the literature and the data that you can combine and use, is a great vision, and this was a vision from Jim Gray. So lastly, let me sort of sum up with some of the things that I think will be in your future. Machine learning, I'll talk a little bit about visualization technologies, and then end with some words about cloud services, because I think these three technologies are going to be there in the future. So machine learning, I've given lots of examples of machine learning, so I'm not going to go into detail, but just to say that, you know, we've known for a long time computers are good for storing and computing and looking after huge amounts of data, but the number of papers being published per minute nowadays are overwhelming the ability of scientists to keep up. We need help from our computers, and so we'd like computers to help with the automatic acquisition, aggregation, correlation, interpretation, discovery, organization, analysis, and inference, so they know what we're looking for and they can infer information for us, and we can then go and use that information. So machine learning technologies, semantic technologies of all types will enable this to take place. So machine learning of all types will be here in the future. Understanding medical images. This is an interesting problem for computer science, that a human being can immediately distinguish the rib cage from the arteries in a medical image. Can you teach a computer to be able to distinguish between a heart and a liver and a kidney? We can do it. Can we teach a computer? And so that's what this project led by Antonio Cremonesi and his researchers in Microsoft Research Cambridge are looking at. And so they're looking at all sorts of exciting things, including an analysis of brain tumors, a particularly unpleasant brain tumor which is called glioblastoma, which is very aggressive and usually fatal, but can you assist the surgeon in doing operations? And so using the Kinect sensor, you can actually, as the surgeon's operating, they can see exactly where the tumor is, so you can actually go and, on a mock-up of the patient's head, you can actually go in and look at the brain, look at actually the tumor, and actually isolate where you should be doing your operation. So these are augmented reality applications that you can actually use with your vision technologies, and these type of technologies I think will become of increasing importance. And then we heard yesterday that there's a new institute for natural disasters in Brazil. So this is an example that we did in Europe about fires. And some years ago on Greek islands, which are relatively small, there were these disastrous, it got very hot and very dry, and then there were these high winds, and fires could really have burnt up the whole island. So there were very great dangers for the Greek islanders in those days. And so this is an example of how you might prevent that. So this is trying to take all the possible data you can about the island and about the fire risk, the vegetation, and so on. So you have a weather model, you have real-time information, you know about the winds, you know about the forecast, you know about the vegetation, the topography, whether it's a mountain or a valley, satellite images, road networks, the history of fires, which is an urban area, what's an agricultural area, and so on. So you have all these different data sources, and you wish to combine them into models. So this is a model that's now deployed in the Greek island of Lesbos, and it gives you a visualization of the fire risk. So this is based on the 5-day weather forecast, and it tells you what the fire risk is in a color-coded way here. And so that's using the weather forecast. You can look at it based on the current weather. If the winds are high, what is the most likely areas where you need to have your firemen deployed, just in case. This is, if there is a fire, what does the wind, which way is it likely to grow, fire simulation and mapping. And so these are some of the things that you can do using, if you like, the data fusion of all these different data, putting visualization, putting analysis and machine learning together to build a model which is useful for disaster recovery and prevention. And so again, this uses the power of cloud computing to bring computing power to bear on this problem when you need it. And this is Microsoft's cloud. It's called Azure, and that's what we've been using in many of these experiments, and it can be used for various services. There's some faculty resources you can go and look at. As of this year, besides supporting Windows VMs, virtual machines, it also supports Linux, and it also supports an open source implementation of the Hadoop non-relational database MapReduce algorithm. And so it's now a real useful resource that you can use for applying to a whole variety of problems, as I've tried to show, from genomics to the environment. So, a concluding slide. I think machine learning is a skill that computer scientists need to work with scientists to educate them. You need scientists who know which computing program is useful and which particular algorithm for machine learning is appropriate for their data, and collaboration with computer scientists is a useful way. But you can also train people. People who are environmental scientists need to be trained and understand some of the technologies in computer science. Visualization technologies, I showed you some examples of that. This Zoom technologies, how you tell stories. If you like, interactive storytelling with data, I think will become increasingly important. And I also believe that in order to be able to deal with unpredictable amounts of computation, cost-effective computation, both for research and for business. Okay, it's clearly a message from Bill Gates. How do I get rid of that? I've got it in it. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
So, hello. We have time for a couple of questions. Well, as moderator, it's part of the moderator's task to ask difficult questions. And I'll start, and then people will ask other questions. I'll follow the technique that I follow with some of my exams, that I ask a couple of questions and the student chooses which one he or she wants to answer. So I'll ask you two questions and you choose the one you prefer to answer. First one is, you talked about lots of exciting directions to advance science through collaboration of computer scientists and scientists of other domains. And it made it sound very smooth and very easy, and things appeared out of nowhere. So,
I never said it was easy.
No, but you didn't, but that's the way
okay.
I perceived it. So what kind of barriers, or would you talk about a few barriers? And the other question would be, is there anything that you'd recommend scientists from other domains to learn from, to study in computer science, so they can explain to computer scientists what their needs are, so that we can understand them faster and better?
Okay. Okay, so the first one...
you don't need to answer both.
No, but let me try the first one. There's a project where a researcher has a tower where they measure water vapor, carbon dioxide, temperature, and so on, and they measure it every 6 hours, and they put the data into a database. It's flat files it's stored. So this is a project. It's called the Ameriflux project, and there's these towers in fields all across America, about 140 of them, and there's actually a bigger one which is actually around the globe. But let's just talk about the American ones. And obviously, if you want to find out, so every 6 hours you get a small amount of data saved in a file. And if you want to get a week average for this particular tower in this particular field, it's very easy. The professor tells his student to go and get that. And the student spends many hours getting all the data together, adding it up, and doing stupid things that they shouldn't have to do. So what we've actually done is take that data and put it into a database, hiding the fact that it's a relational database and SQL and all this sort of stuff, and putting a nice interface that even the professor can go and actually allocate and find out exactly what the average for the week is for this field. And of course, when you publish now with all this data available, instead of just publishing from one tower in one particular place, it's more useful to do it from a region. But that involves a cultural change. Instead of the professor and his 2 graduate students publishing a paper with 3 authors, if you take a region with 10 towers, then you have 10 professors and 20 students. It's a 30-author paper. And that's a cultural change in the publication and credit for that field, and this is a sociological problem. And so these things take time. Physicists now published with hundreds of scientists on it, but again, that's been a change over the last 20 years. So I think there are these cultural problems which are as important as the technical ones. But by making the data available, you can do more useful things, and also removing the burden for students to have to do stupid things that should be easy. I think, personally, students need to be looked after.
Okay. Thank you. Any more? Oh, Andrea.
So I am Andrea of Unicamp. Thanks for the presentation. I have a question concerning our curriculum in computer science, because when we go to the force paradigm, we go beyond computation, okay? And sometimes I think our curriculum is too much algorithm-centric and not so much data-centric, okay? So do you think we need to review that, or thinking about a new curriculum to this specific kind of computer science guy?
Yes, I mean I do. So we're familiar with algorithms as if you like the heart of computer science for shortest path and all this sort of stuff. Yes, and that's what we teach. But we also teach things like neural networks, which are not conventional algorithms, and they learn from the data and they evolve to do pattern recognition or whatever they've been trained to do. And those are not conventional algorithms. So we do teach some of those. But you're right, I think we do need to think, for example, if we were doing a 1-year master's course for scientists, what would we teach them? We should teach them more than just algorithms. We should teach them a whole set of technologies in machine learning. And they are all about data, how you learn from data. And I think one of the major insights in computer science is Bayesian networks, the fact that there was this big debate among statisticians because there were the people who believed, they were called the frequentists, that you had to take data many times and take an average. That was the only sensible thing to do. And then there were these people called Bayes who believed you could make a guess. And that's not very scientific, but from that guess you could improve with more and more data. So in Bayes' paper, for example, the example he gives is of a newborn baby who doesn't know whether the sun will come up next morning. So he takes a bet. It's 50% likely it'll come up, 50% it isn't. If it doesn't come up, he's going to call up with the black ball and a white ball if it comes up, and he puts them into a bag. and the sun comes up. So he puts a white ball in because the sun came up, and after 100 days in that bag you have 99 white balls and 1 black ball. So your initial guess, which was 50-50, has now become very much weighted towards the sun coming up. And it's about learning from data, and that's a very important part, and Bayesian methods and Bayesian networks are an important part. We should teach people how to deal with uncertainty, and I think that's an important part. And it isn't the traditional algorithms. I agree.
Okay, we just have time for one last question, which is over there.
I'm Junior Barreira. I'm professor from the Institute of Mathematics and Statistics from the Department of Computer Science. I have a question related to the question of my colleague. You have presented us a nice talk, and your last slide is concerning the future. I'd like to ask what's the importance of the development of mathematics to arrive there?
What's the
importance of development of mathematics? We have talked a lot about technology, computer science.
Yes.
But I believe mathematics is behind all that.
Absolutely. No. Again, when I talk about the fourth paradigm, it does not mean that experiment and theory and computation are not important. Of course they are. And similarly, one of the fundamental bedrocks of computing is mathematics. So mathematics is important, and the example of Bayesian networks is where I think is one of the places that mathematics can make a difference, but there are other places that new mathematics can play a role. I absolutely agree. So mathematics is going to be fundamental in doing this data analysis, data mining, and we need people who are educated both in mathematics and computer science and science. And that's the challenge that we have to have as professors in universities. That's what you need to create, these new data scientists, which can go into science, but also to industry and help the country's innovation agenda and business. So I think you can do both. But mathematics is a key part.
Okay, thank you. Let's thank Tony for this very interesting talk.